The massive windows of Asteroid Repair Station 47 offered a perfect view of the endless starfield, but Tom Miller wasn't looking at the stars. His attention was fixed on the ancient coffee maker that had chosen this moment to start making strange noises. He tapped it gently with his multi-tool, a habit he'd developed over 15 years of fixing things in space. "Come on, old friend," he muttered, adjusting a loose screw. "Don't fail me now." The coffee maker sputtered, then hummed back to life, filling his thermos with the dark, steaming liquid that kept him going through long repair jobs. The repair station was quiet today. Most ships preferred the newer, flashier repair stations closer to the main space lanes. Tom didn't mind. The quiet gave him time to think, tinker, and perfect his repair techniques. He had just settled into his favorite chair, ready to enjoy his fresh coffee, when the emergency alarm blared through the station. Red lights flashed as the computer announced, "Priority distress signal detected. Class A passenger vessel. Multiple system failures reported." Tom stood up, grabbed his thermos, and headed to the control room. The message on the screen made his eyebrows rise. The Stellar Dream, the most advanced cruise ship ever built, was having problems on its maiden voyage. The ship's specs scrolled across his screen. It was a joint venture between 3 different alien species, each contributing their most advanced technology. Tom whistled softly. No wonder they were having troubles. In his experience, mixing different alien tech without proper integration always led to problems. "This is Repair Station 47 responding to your distress call," Tom said into the comm. "Please state the nature of your emergency." The response came in a series of rapid, high-pitched sounds that his translator struggled to keep up with. The alien voice sounded panicked. Multiple cascading failures. Life support operating at 47% efficiency. Artificial gravity destabilizing. Navigation systems compromised. Our engineering team cannot locate the source of the problems. Tom took a long sip of his coffee, already thinking through the possibilities. "Send me your current coordinates and system readings. I'll be there in 20 minutes. You are sending only one engineer." The alien's voice carried a mix of disbelief and disappointment. "Sometimes one is all you need," Tom replied, already walking to his repair shuttle. He'd learned long ago that in space, it wasn't the number of engineers that mattered. It was the way you thought about problems. The shuttle was small and didn't look impressive, but Tom had modified it himself. It could match the speed of ships 3 times its size, and its tool bay contained everything he'd ever needed for a repair job. He patted the worn pilot's seat as he settled in, placing his thermos in its dedicated holder, another custom modification. As he approached the Stellar Dream, he got his first good look at the ship. It was beautiful, in that overdone way that showed its designers cared more about looks than practicality. The hull gleamed with 3 different types of metal, each specialized by different alien engineering teams. The ship was massive, almost a kilometer long, with sweeping curves and elaborate architectural features that probably made the structural engineers cry. Tom could see the problems before he even docked. The ship's running lights were flickering in an irregular pattern, and one entire section was dark. Through the viewports, he caught glimpses of objects floating randomly. The artificial gravity was definitely acting up. His shuttle's sensors picked up the chaotic energy readings from the ship's power systems. 3 different power sources, each designed by a different alien species, all trying to work together without proper integration. It was like 3 people trying to drive one car, each with their own steering wheel. As he lined up with the docking port, Tom took one last sip of his coffee and checked his multi-tool. The device was old, scratched, and had been modified so many times it barely resembled its original form. But like its owner, it had never met a problem it couldn't handle. The docking clamps engaged with a solid thunk. Through the airlock window, Tom could see a group of aliens waiting for him, their expressions ranging from worried to skeptical. He smiled, tucked his multi-tool into his belt, and grabbed his thermos. Time to show these folks how humans fixed things. The airlock door opened with a hiss, and Tom stepped into chaos. 3 different alien engineers immediately started talking at once, their translator units struggling to keep up. The tallest one, with metallic blue skin, was waving what looked like an advanced diagnostic tool in the air. The shortest, covered in iridescent scales, was frantically tapping on a holographic display. The third, who seemed to be made entirely of crystalline structures, just stood there vibrating in what Tom assumed was distress. A sudden gravity fluctuation lifted them all 6 inches off the floor. Tom casually took a sip from his thermos while floating completely unfazed. The aliens stared at him in disbelief. "First things first," Tom said calmly as they settled back to the floor. "I need to see your engine room." He paused, watching another group of passengers drift past the corridor window, looking decidedly unhappy about their unexpected flying lesson. "And maybe we should stabilize the gravity first." The blue-skinned alien, who introduced himself as the chief engineer, led the way. "We have run every possible diagnostic," he said, his translator making his voice sound like clicking gears. "Our tools detect no major malfunctions, yet nothing works correctly." Tom nodded, following them down the corridor while occasionally reaching out to steady himself against the walls. The ship's vibrations felt wrong, like 3 different engines fighting each other. He'd seen something similar before, though not on this scale. The engine room was massive, divided into 3 distinct sections. Each section housed technology from a different alien species, and each looked completely incompatible with the others. Holographic warning signs floated everywhere, their alien symbols flashing in urgent patterns. "Show me your power distribution system," Tom said, pulling out his multi-tool. The crystalline engineer made a sound like tinkling bells, possibly a laugh. "Your primitive device cannot interface with our systems," they chimed. "We are using quantum-encoded data streams and neural-linked interfaces." Tom smiled and pulled a small adapter from his pocket, one of many he'd made himself over the years. He attached it to his multi-tool and held it up to the nearest control panel. Numbers and diagrams immediately appeared in the air above it. The scaled engineer's eyes widened. "How did you?" "Sometimes the old ways work best," Tom said, studying the readings. "You've got 3 different power sources, each running on different principles, all trying to sync up through automated systems, but they're not talking to each other properly." He walked around the engine room, taking readings at different points. The ship shuddered, and for a moment the artificial gravity reversed completely. Tom found himself standing on the ceiling, still calmly taking measurements while the alien engineers flailed in panic. "Your quantum drive is trying to compensate for fluctuations in the crystal matrix engine," he explained, "but it's overreacting because it's getting delayed readings through the neural interface. Meanwhile, your third power source is trying to balance things out, but it's working from outdated information." The gravity flipped back, and they all landed on the floor. Tom somehow managed not to spill a drop of his coffee. He walked to the main control panel and pulled a small screwdriver attachment from his multi-tool. "What are you doing?" the blue engineer asked in alarm. "That panel houses extremely sensitive equipment." "Trust me," Tom said, already removing the panel's cover. Inside was a maze of glowing circuits, quantum threads, and crystal matrices. He reached in with his multi-tool and made a few careful adjustments. The ship's vibrations changed pitch. Tom made another adjustment, and the gravity fluctuations suddenly stopped. The warning holograms began disappearing one by one. The alien engineers stared at their own diagnostic tools in amazement. "The power systems are synchronizing," the scaled one said in disbelief. "But how?" "You only changed a few connections. Sometimes systems get too smart for their own good," Tom explained, taking another sip of coffee. "Your automated systems were trying so hard to be perfect, they ended up fighting each other. I just added a small delay to each system's response time. Now, instead of all trying to fix things at once, they're taking turns." The crystalline engineer vibrated rapidly. "But that's so simple," Tom suggested. "Simple can be good. Now let's talk about your life support systems. I noticed they're running a bit rough, and I have a few ideas about that too. He pulled out his multi-tool again, already thinking about his next fix. Behind him, the three alien engineers exchanged looks, beginning to realize that perhaps they had underestimated both this human and his seemingly primitive tools. After 2 hours of crawling through maintenance tunnels and making adjustments to various systems, Tom decided it was time for a coffee break. The alien engineers watched in confusion as he sat down on a nearby maintenance crate, pulled out his thermos, and poured himself a fresh cup of steaming coffee. But there are still systems to fix, the blue-skinned engineer protested. The environmental controls are still malfunctioning in sections 3 through 7, and the navigation computer is speaking in rhymes. Tom took a long sip of his coffee and looked up at the tangle of power conduits running across the ceiling. Sometimes you need to step back to see the bigger picture, he said. Join me. I brought extra cups. The aliens hesitated, then sat down around him. Tom poured them each a small cup of coffee. The crystalline engineer held their cup up to their surface, somehow absorbing the liquid through their outer layer. The scaled engineer sniffed it suspiciously before taking a tiny sip, while the blue-skinned one analyzed it with a handheld scanner first. This beverage contains high levels of caffeine and various organic compounds, the blue one announced. How does this help solve engineering problems? Tom smiled and pointed to the power distribution diagram floating nearby. Look at that display while drinking the coffee. Tell me what you see. The aliens sipped their coffee and studied the diagram. The scaled engineer suddenly leaned forward, their eyes widening. The power fluctuations, they follow a pattern. Exactly, Tom said. Your ship's systems are like this coffee. They need to blend properly. Right now, you've got 3 different power sources trying to work together, but they're like 3 different temperatures of liquid fighting each other. He stood up and walked to the main engineering console, coffee in hand. The holographic display showed the ship's power grid as a complex web of interconnected lines. See these intersection points. Each one is where your different technologies meet. But instead of blending smoothly like cream and coffee, they're staying separate and creating turbulence. The crystalline engineer vibrated in understanding. Like oil and water. Right, Tom said. Your quantum drive creates tiny time distortions. Your crystal matrix engine generates spatial fluctuations. And your third system produces energy waves that interact with both. They're all working fine individually, but together. Together, they're causing interference patterns. The blue engineer exclaimed, Our diagnostic tools were looking for problems within each system, not at the spaces between them. Tom nodded and took another sip of coffee. The most interesting problems often happen at the boundaries, the places where different things meet, like how the surface of coffee creates tension with the air, making patterns. He pulled out his multi-tool and attached a small device he'd made years ago for analyzing wave patterns. The aliens watched as he held it over his coffee cup, showing how the heat created convection currents in the liquid. Your ship's problems are like these currents, he explained. Each system is creating its own patterns, but they're not flowing together properly. We need to create buffer zones, like adding cream to coffee gradually, instead of all at once. The scaled engineer quickly pulled up the ship's original design specifications. Our teams worked separately on each system. We assumed the automated interfaces would handle any integration issues. Never trust automation to do what common sense can handle, Tom said, finishing his coffee. Now watch this. He walked to the main power control panel and began adjusting settings with his multi-tool. I'm creating small buffer zones at each intersection point, he explained as he worked. Instead of letting the systems interact directly, we'll let them blend gradually, like how coffee and cream mix naturally if you give them time. The ship's background hum changed pitch, becoming smoother and more harmonious. Warning lights across the engineering bay began turning green one by one. The aliens watched their diagnostic tools in amazement as the system's stability readings steadily improved. The environmental controls are rebalancing. The crystalline engineer chimed excitedly. And the navigation computer, it stopped speaking in rhymes. Tom smiled and started packing away his tools. Amazing what you can figure out over a cup of coffee, isn't it? Now about those life support systems. I noticed something interesting about their thermal exchange patterns while we were drinking. Want to hear my theory? The alien engineers eagerly gathered around, each still holding their empty coffee cups, ready to learn more about this surprisingly effective combination of simple tools and hot beverages. The life support system's main control room sparkled with advanced technology from 3 different alien civilizations. Sleek quantum processors sat next to crystalline computational matrices and bioorganic neural interfaces, and in the middle of it all stood Tom, holding up his battered multi-tool like a conductor's baton. "Your air recyclers are getting confused," he explained to the worried alien engineers. "Each section is trying to maintain different atmospheric conditions because they're all running on different standards." A warning light started flashing, and the room's temperature suddenly dropped 10 degrees. The scaled engineer's tail started shivering. "Our atmospheric processors are operating at peak efficiency. The problem must be elsewhere." Tom shook his head and pulled a small sensor attachment from his tool belt, connecting it to his multi-tool. "Watch this," he said, pointing it at the nearest air vent. The attached screen showed 3 different air currents, each tinted a different color in the display. "See these patterns? Your quantum processors are measuring air quality in microseconds. The crystal matrices are sampling in standard seconds, and the bioorganic systems are working on a 3-second delay. They're all trying to adjust the same air, but at different times." The blue-skinned engineer's antenna drooped. "But these are the most advanced atmospheric processors ever created. They cannot be wrong." "They're not wrong," Tom said, already opening an access panel. "They're just not working together. Sometimes the fanciest tools aren't what you need." He pulled a small piece of metal from his pocket, something that looked suspiciously like it had once been part of a coffee maker. The crystalline engineer vibrated in alarm. "What are you doing with that primitive piece of metal?" "Making an adapter," Tom replied, using his multi-tool to bend and shape the metal. His fingers moved quickly, folding and twisting until he had created something that looked like a small maze. "This will create air turbulence patterns that force your 3 systems to synchronize." The aliens watched in horror as he installed his makeshift device into their pristine machinery, but as soon as he activated it, the temperature stabilized. The warning lights stopped flashing. "How?" the scaled engineer asked, checking their diagnostic tools. "The readings. They're perfect." "Sometimes you need to work with nature instead of against it," Tom explained, moving to the next system. "Now, about these pressure regulators." He spent the next hour moving through the life support systems, making similar adjustments with his multi-tool and various bits and pieces he pulled from his pockets. The aliens cringed every time he pulled out another primitive solution, but they couldn't argue with the results. When he reached the main oxygen distribution hub, he found a more serious problem. The seals were failing between different sections, causing dangerous pressure fluctuations. The aliens' sophisticated repair tools were too large to reach the damaged areas. Impossible to fix without completely dismantling the system, the blue engineer declared. It would take days. Tom looked at the problem, took a sip of coffee, and smiled. He pulled out his multi-tool and started making adjustments. "The seals aren't the real problem," he said. "It's the pressure differential. Watch this." He removed the handle from his backup thermos and, using his multi-tool, transformed it into a pressure regulator. The aliens gasped as he carefully inserted it into the machinery. "You're using a beverage container part to fix a critical life support system," the crystalline engineer chimed in disbelief. "This thermos handle is made of materials designed to handle extreme temperature changes and pressure differences," Tom explained. "Sometimes the best solution is the one you never expected." He made a few final adjustments with his multi-tool, and suddenly all the pressure readings stabilized. The whole life support system hummed in perfect harmony for the first time since the ship's launch. The alien engineers stared at their readings in amazement. Their most advanced diagnostic tools confirmed that the ship's atmosphere was now perfectly balanced throughout all sections. "I don't understand," the blue engineer said. "Our tools cost millions of credits. Our systems are the most advanced in the galaxy. How can you fix them with a multi-tool and thermos parts?" Tom grinned. "Because sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. Now, who's ready to tackle the navigation system? I've got an idea involving this old compass I carry." The aliens looked at each other, then at their own expensive tools, and began to wonder if perhaps their civilizations had overcomplicated things just a bit. A loud alarm blared through the ship's corridors, and the lighting shifted to an ominous red. Tom and the alien engineers were heading to check the navigation systems when the emergency alert stopped them in their tracks. "Environmental control failure in the passenger quarters," the blue-skinned engineer shouted, looking at his diagnostic pad. "Temperature rising rapidly in all luxury suites. Cooling systems not responding." The crystalline engineer vibrated frantically. "The backup systems are offline too. At this rate, the temperature will become dangerous for passengers in 15 minutes. Tom reached for his thermos, took a thoughtful sip of his espresso, and suddenly his eyes lit up. "Tell me about your cooling systems design," he said, already walking quickly toward the environmental control center. The scaled engineer pulled up the schematics on a holographic display as they hurried along. 3 different cooling systems, each designed by a different alien species, were supposed to work together to keep the passenger areas comfortable. Instead, they were now generating excess heat and making things worse. "Look at this design," Tom said, pointing to the diagram. "You're trying to cool things down by running 3 separate systems at full power, but they're working against each other. It's like..." He held up his thermos. "It's like trying to cool down hot coffee by putting it in 3 different fridges at once." The aliens looked confused, but Tom was already pulling out his multi-tool. He opened his thermos and showed them the inside. "See this vacuum layer? It's simple but effective. It keeps hot things hot and cold things cold because it understands a basic truth. Sometimes you need to isolate things instead of forcing them together." He moved to the main control panel and began making adjustments. "Your cooling systems are like 3 people trying to drive 1 car. Instead, we need to make them work like my thermos, each part doing its own job without interfering with the others." Using his multi-tool, Tom started modifying the environmental controls. He created virtual barriers between the 3 cooling systems, similar to the vacuum layer in his thermos. The alien engineers watched in amazement as he essentially rebuilt their cooling system's logic using principles from his coffee container. "But that's so primitive," the blue engineer said, though with less conviction than before. "Sometimes primitive is perfect," Tom replied, making final adjustments. "Your advanced systems were trying to be too clever. They were analyzing and reanalyzing every temperature change, getting stuck in feedback loops. This way is simpler." The temperature readings began to drop. Tom had effectively created 3 separate cooling zones that worked in harmony instead of fighting each other. The emergency alarms finally stopped. The scaled engineer checked their readings. "This is incredible. The passenger areas are now at optimal temperature, and we're using 30% less energy than before." Tom nodded, taking another sip from his thermos. "Your systems were overthinking the problem. They were like trying to cool down coffee by running complex calculations about heat distribution, molecular movement, and quantum states. Sometimes you just need a good thermos." The crystalline engineer moved closer to study the modified controls. "You used the same principles from your drinking container to fix an advanced environmental system designed by 3 of the most sophisticated civilizations in the galaxy. The principles of thermodynamics are universal," Tom said with a smile. "Doesn't matter if you're keeping coffee hot or keeping passengers cool. The basic rules stay the same. He showed them how he had programmed the systems to work in sequence rather than simultaneously, just like the layers in his thermos work together to maintain temperature. The aliens began taking notes, fascinated by how this seemingly simple approach solved their complex problems. "This is going to change how we think about environmental systems," the blue engineer admitted, studying the new configuration. "All our advanced technology, and we never considered something as simple as thermal isolation layers." Tom gathered his tools, ready to move on to the next problem. "That's the thing about technology," he said. "Sometimes you get so focused on making things advanced, you forget that nature already figured out the best way to do it. Now, about that navigation system. I think I know how to fix it, and it involves another lesson from my coffee maker." The aliens followed eagerly, their earlier skepticism completely forgotten. They had learned that sometimes the most powerful solutions could come from the simplest sources, even if that source was just a well-designed coffee thermos. The navigation room of the Stellar Dream was probably the most advanced room Tom had ever seen. Holographic star maps floated in the air, quantum computers calculated faster-than-light trajectories, and crystal matrices processed data from 1,000 different sensors. In the middle of all this technology, Tom sat cross-legged on the floor, his multi-tool and thermos beside him. "Okay," he said to the alien engineers gathered around him. "Before we fix the navigation system, let's talk about how you approach problems. Show me how you'd handle a simple repair." The blue-skinned engineer stepped forward, pulling out an expensive diagnostic tool. A small panel near them was making an annoying beeping sound. The engineer waved his device over it, and hundreds of readings appeared in the air. "First, we analyze all possible variables," the engineer explained. "The quantum scanner checks for anomalies across 11 dimensions. Then the probability calculator determines the most likely." The beeping got louder. Tom reached over with his multi-tool and gave the panel 2 gentle taps. The beeping stopped. "Sometimes," Tom said with a smile, "you don't need to analyze 11 dimensions. Sometimes a connection is just loose." The scaled engineer's tail twitched. "But how can you know without running a full diagnostic?" Tom picked up his thermos. "When I pour coffee, I don't calculate the exact molecular structure of the liquid, the precise angle of pouring, and the quantum states of each particle. I just pour. Experience teaches you what works." He stood up and walked to the main navigation console. "Your ship's navigation system is trying to be too perfect. It's calculating every possible route through space-time, analyzing every quantum variable, and trying to account for every possibility in the universe." The crystalline engineer chimed in confusion. "Isn't that good? More calculation means more accuracy." "Not always," Tom said. He pulled out his multi-tool and opened a small panel under the console. "Watch this. When I was younger, I had a small fishing boat back on Earth. It had a simple compass. Not very advanced, but you know what? It never got confused about which way was north." He began making adjustments inside the panel, using various attachments from his multi-tool. "Your navigation system is like having 1,000 compasses, all pointing slightly different ways. Sure, you have more data, but you've lost the simple truth of which way is forward." The aliens watched as Tom worked, explaining each step. He showed them how their complex systems were actually making navigation harder by overthinking every decision. Using his multi-tool, he created a simpler framework that helped all their advanced technology work together more smoothly. "See, the problem isn't that your technology is bad," Tom explained while connecting a few wires. "It's that you're not letting it work naturally. It's like trying to drink coffee by analyzing each sip at the molecular level instead of just enjoying it." The blue engineer's antenna perked up in understanding. "So we should trust our systems more. Let them find their own balance." "Exactly," Tom said. "Your quantum computers are amazing, but they need a foundation, something simple and reliable to build upon." He pointed to various parts of the system as he explained. "Think of it like building a house. You don't start with fancy decorations. You start with a solid foundation. The scaled engineer started taking notes. This goes against everything we were taught about advanced technology. They said, we always believed more complexity meant better results. Tom finished his adjustments and closed the panel. The star maps above them suddenly became clearer, more stable. The navigation system's constant chatter of calculations quieted to a smooth hum. Try it now, Tom said, stepping back. The crystalline engineer interfaced with the navigation system. Their crystalline surface lit up with joy. It's perfect. The calculations are faster, clearer, and more accurate than before. Sometimes, Tom said, gathering his tools, teaching your advanced systems to do simple things well is better than making them do complicated things poorly. It's like making good coffee. You don't need the fanciest machine in the world. You just need to understand the basics and respect the process. The alien engineers looked at their own complicated tools, then at Tom's simple multi-tool with new understanding. They were beginning to realize that true innovation wasn't always about adding more complexity. Sometimes it was about finding the elegant simplicity hidden within complex problems. The stellar dream hummed with perfect harmony as Tom packed his tools. All systems were running smoothly. The power grid was stable, life support was working perfectly, and the navigation system was plotting courses with unprecedented accuracy. The alien engineers gathered around him in the ship's main corridor, their earlier skepticism replaced with genuine respect. Before I go, Tom said, reaching into his repair kit, I have something for each of you. He pulled out 3 multi-tools, each one slightly worn but well-maintained. The aliens stared at the simple devices in surprise. These are some of my backup tools, Tom explained, handing them out. I've modified each one to work with your ship's systems. They're not as fancy as your quantum analyzers or neural interfaces, but they might come in handy someday. The blue-skinned engineer turned the multi-tool over in his hands, studying it with new appreciation. But how will we know when to use these instead of our advanced equipment? Tom smiled and walked over to a nearby wall panel. Watch this, he said. He pressed a few buttons, and suddenly a small section of the panel went dark. Now try to fix it with your regular tools. The crystalline engineer immediately pulled out their quantum diagnostic device. After several minutes of scanning and analyzing, they looked confused. The readings show nothing wrong, but it's clearly not working. Now try the multi-tool, Tom suggested. The engineer hesitantly opened the multi-tool's screwdriver attachment and opened the panel. Inside, they found a simple loose connection. One quick adjustment later, the panel lit up again. You see, Tom said, sometimes the most advanced solution isn't the best solution. Sometimes you just need to look at the problem with fresh eyes and simple tools. The scaled engineer raised their hand. But what about the coffee maker you mentioned? You said it was part of your problem-solving process. Tom grinned and pulled one more item from his repair kit, a compact, rugged coffee maker. This is my backup coffee maker. I want you to have it too. The blue engineer's antenna twitched in confusion. How will this help us maintain the ship? It's not just about the coffee, Tom explained, setting up the machine. It's about taking breaks, stepping back from problems, and letting your mind find simple solutions. Sometimes the best ideas come when you're not trying so hard to be perfect. He showed them how to make coffee, explaining the simple but precise process. The aliens watched, fascinated, as he demonstrated how the right temperature, timing, and patience could create the perfect cup. Your ship's systems are a lot like making coffee, Tom said as the machine brewed. You need the right balance of elements. You need to be patient, and sometimes you need to trust the process instead of trying to control every detail. The crystalline engineer absorbed a sip of fresh coffee through their surface. I think I understand now. It's about finding harmony between simplicity and complexity. Exactly, Tom said. You've got amazing technology on this ship, but don't let it make you forget the basics. When something goes wrong, try the simple fix first. And when you're stuck on a problem, Take a coffee break, the scaled engineer suggested, their tail swishing in amusement. Now you're getting it, Tom laughed. As he prepared to leave, the ship's captain arrived to thank him personally. We've already updated our engineering protocols, the captain announced. From now on, all our engineers will be trained in what we're calling the Miller method, starting with simple solutions before moving to complex ones. Tom rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed by the attention. Just remember, the best technology in the universe won't help if you overthink the problem. Sometimes all you need is a good multi-tool, a cup of coffee, and the wisdom to know that simple isn't the same as primitive. He walked back to his repair shuttle, leaving behind 3 alien engineers examining their new multi-tools with interest. Through the ship's windows, he could see them gathering around the coffee maker, already deep in discussion about their next maintenance project. As his shuttle detached from the stellar dream, Tom smiled and took one last sip from his trusty thermos. Sometimes the biggest problems in the universe could be solved with the simplest tools, that, and a really good cup of coffee.